So, hello everyone and welcome to my first ever conference talk. As you can see from the above slide, it's all about bringing trusted binaries to a system and using them in kind of an adversarial fashion, hopefully to kind of thwart EDR. You may have experimented with some of these binaries before, some of them aren't new, but at the end I'll hopefully show you kind of a novel way of using one in particular to get around a certain issue which you might find interesting. With this, I started off thinking I would go down the no video route and just enlarging images and things like this. But it looks like the screen probably would have coped with videos. But anyway, I've zoomed into consoles and commands to hopefully show you guys better how I was doing this. Okay, so next on to the obligatory who am I slide I see at most conferences. My name is David Kennedy. Apologies to anyone coming here thinking they're coming to see David Kennedy from Trusted Sec. I've spoke to a few of you online on Twitter who were a bit gutted. So yeah, I'm the pound shop Irish version rather than the highly successful Irish American version, unfortunately. You can leave now if you like. I work as a senior cybersecurity consultant at JumpSec. I specialize in purple teaming and red teaming and a bunch of certs like OSCP, CRTP and CRTO. I have a little blog over on redteaming.org you can check out and kind of similar stuff to what I will be talking about today. And the stuff I really enjoy is kind of like building up red team infrastructure, relaying to NTLM, and even for the first time this week I tried relaying to Kerberos, which is kind of new. Check out the KRB Relay X tool. It's really cool. And then I like doing lateral movement from cloud or from on-prem to cloud. I quite enjoy as well. So next up, why I think this particular topic would be useful for you guys. Over the next couple of slides, I will discuss how it would be useful from an offensive point of view and also a defensive point of view. Offensive, they'll hopefully give us testers easier access to systems, and defensive from a kind of a near the end, a blue teamer point of view. So how you can defend against these type of attacks. So let's roll on some AI generated images and I will explain a bit more. So, onerous callbacks. Like me, if you ever get a client device as part of a test, the first thing you try and do is maybe try and get a call back to your Legalo server or Legolo, whatever way you pronounce it, or your Chisel or your C2 or whatever. When you've got sophisticated EDRs like CrowdStrike and things like this in place, it can be very difficult. And sometimes you might ask the client, oh, can I add an exclusion to a certain folder to allow my callback to be triggered? And they might say, oh, we wouldn't give that to a real hacker, so just plow on and see how you get on with it for the next few hours. And you could spend a few hours at it, trying to garble your payloads or whatever. And for a newcomer, that's a high bar to entry. Like if you've just passed OSCP and that's all you've done, you wouldn't be into kind of obfuscating C2 payloads or a bunch of that stuff. So it can be very tough, especially for newcomers. So I felt we need a bit of simplification around this. The next reason this would be a useful topic, and very similar to the last reason, is the whole EDR whack-a-mole. It's more about the kind of longevity. Like even if we do get our Legalos or Chisels working or C2 implants, we don't know if a week or two later the next EDR might stop it, or the same EDR might stop it. They're constantly evolving and stopping things, especially when they're open source tools. These EDRs don't respect the open source value of these tools, and they will just block it because they gain nothing from keeping them alive. So it's a constant cat and mouse, as I was saying. So I wanted a technique that would potentially give us as testers just a bit more longevity, and maybe we could rely on it a bit more. And hopefully the techniques I will show you in this talk would maybe achieve that. Next up, the next reason is advanced persistent threat usage. If you're like me and you enjoy reading the DFIR reports where they show what the ransomware guys do, you can see their commands, and they're super interesting to see how these guys operate and the level they operate. You see recently they started using a lot of trusted binaries such as MS Dev tunnels or Cloudflare, for example. And we need to be in a position to use them as testers to help our clients defend against them, and how to detect them. So a bit of a spoiler, this guy behind said Cloudflared binary will be used a lot on this talk. So yeah, we'll see that shortly. So to avoid these issues, I wanted to come up with a technique to pass 5 tests. To be honest, it started as 6, but the 6th one was around hiding your infrastructure behind a redirector, which you can read about more on my blog, but it's probably too detailed for a presentation like this. So the 5 tests were as follows. The first technique I wanted to be able to pass through would be to allow me to proxy my Kali tools into the remote network. And so then I could use my goodies like NetExec and Impacket and all those useful tools. Next up, I wanted it to be ignored by a sophisticated EDR. In this example, I just picked CrowdStrike. As testers, a lot of you will know that's quite a good kind of bar to set it at. And when I say ignored, I mean that when I put the binary on disk, it doesn't get deleted straight away. When I run it, it doesn't get deleted straight away. Obviously, if you're sending thousands of LDAP queries from Bloodhound through your trusted binary, it's going to get flagged based on behavior or whatever. So it was more just that initial access to kind of lower the bar to entry, as I discussed. Next up, I wanted to be firewall friendly. I didn't want it to require, we say, port 22 outbound. I didn't want it to require port 7000, some funky high-numbered ports outbound. I wanted to be firewall-friendly, this technique. Next up, a Legalo or Legolo alternative, and we use this quite heavily. It's such a great tool, and allows you to get access to the client networks quite easy. But we did notice that it was starting to get nuked every so often by specific EDRs, and because it's open source, as I say, these EDRs they don't care about these type of tools. And finally, no pre-installed SSH client. I didn't want it to be that we would rely on SSH being pre-installed on the machine, because a lot of the corporate machines, they won't have SSH installed. Actually, at the moment, I'm at a hedge fund and it does have SSH installed, which is quite interesting. But most times, a lot of the corporate devices will just remove SSH. So I didn't want that to be a barrier for one of my tests. Next up. So I'll just talk you through my solution one on how to achieve what I think would pass those tests. So what we have up behind me on the left is we've got a client device and we've got the Cloudflare D binary. I'll probably refer to it as Cloudflared because it's easier. So we've got the Cloudflared binary in that orange dotted box. And as you guess, it's owned by Cloudflare. And within that box, I have the SSH client. And the reason I put it within the Cloudflared box is that I'm using the SSH client's proxy command. And the beauty of using the proxy command with SSH is you're essentially telling SSH to use another tool to take the data out of your environment. And by using the proxy command with the Cloudflared binary, the Cloudflared binary uses port 443. SSH data will then go out on port 443 and also will be encapsulated as HTTPS data. So it's not your typical SSH data that can be blocked. So that all of a sudden meets my firewall friendly requirements, which is quite useful. And then in the middle, when the data comes out from 443, it will hit, a host name that we would set up on the Cloudflare portal. In my example, I set up ssh.redteaming.org, which was on my blog. And what happens then is when it hits that, you then start another tunnel from using Cloudflared on your Cloud VM, your Kali, and it allows the tunnel to get into your internal network. So essentially sending SSH data to ssh.redteaming.org using the Cloudflared binary on the client device, it travels all the way into my actual Kali machine. So before I go any further, it's probably worth explaining how the Cloudflared binary operates in two modes and how host names work. So this is what the Cloudflare portal would look like. On the left, you've got my ssh.redteaming.org, and then what do I map it to? So you don't have to map it to 22, but in my example, I just mapped it to my internal network on port 22. And then we also have the Cloudflare binary operating in access mode. And with access mode, essentially, it's for using it for specific services. You can see behind me that I'm using for RDP here, and I'm just tunneling that into 3389 whenever you send that data to rdp.redteaming.org. In tunnel mode, it's slightly different. It allows for multiple services. Just think of a tunnel going out. You can send any data through it. It doesn't have to be limited to specific services. So they're just the two modes, and these will become clearer as we go on. So here's the solution. It's only two commands. So I'm back on Kali. You just run Cloudflare tunnel run. So that's your tunnel mode. You're kicking off from Kali, and then you've just got your secret token that will be tagged on at the end that you're given for that particular tunnel when you set it up. And then back back on the client, it's simple. Just use ssh.exe, use your proxy command, and then you tell it, okay, use Cloudflare to take the data out. And the %H there just says, take the host name from the next part of the command, which is your ssh.redteaming.org. The key bit, and for those of you who notice this, is the -R 1080 at the end. What that does is it opens up a remote port forward back on Kali on 1080. And when you don't specify a destination, which I learned recently on a Trusted Sec blog, it opens up a SOCKS proxy back on Kali. And the beauty of that then is, for those of you who know and work with proxy chains, when you run proxy chains from Kali and point it then at 1080, it jumps through your tunnels and into the client device. I think this might be even easier to see it on the console. So here we have the Cloudflare tunnel running on Kali in the top image. So that's just doing it with your secret code. Obviously, I've changed that code. Then the next one, we've got the ssh.exe running with proxy command and the reverse SOCKS proxy opening up on 1080. In this example, I haven't specified -F and -N with SSH, which would normally run it in the background and not allow execute remote commands, etc. I just showed it logging in for you guys to use it. And also, you could use it with a key if you wanted to. And then back on Kali, proxy chains. Just use CME in this example I think I've used, and we have access to the client network. So essentially, a lot of the stuff is set up for you, like the top image and the third image, but the middle image is all you have to run to get your access into the network using this Cloudflared binary. I think maybe at this point you might be thinking, oh, how trusted is this binary? And as I say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So here's a screenshot a colleague sent me recently. So here's a Cloudflare binary running in tunnel mode on the left, and you can see in the red dot at the bottom, it makes its connection out to the network. And then on the right, he in that particular job had CrowdStrike running. And on my current job, I think there's 3 EDRs on my machine because they're testing a bunch of them, and the same issue. It was a non-issue getting the connection with those. It's just ignored. And I guess you can see why it would be. This Cloudflared binary, even if it sounds new to some of you, it's been out since 2018. If you go on their forums, there's massive banks and people like this using this binary for completely legitimate purposes. But I'm just using it in adversarial fashion. So I think it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, or people would have to proactively start blocking it. So now let's just go back to my 5 tests. So as you can see, it's met most of my 5 tests. Proxies are Kali's tools. It's ignored by CrowdStrike for what I needed to do. Firewall friendly. Looks to be a good legal alternative. But I put the 5th one in amber. No pre-installed SSH client. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, you may have spotted I was using the inbuilt ssh.exe. And obviously that's not good. Corporate devices may not have it installed. So then it got me thinking, God, can I just force a Windows client to be an SSH client? And I was thinking, God, OpenSSH is what they use on Windows. Can I just bring it, another trusted binary, to Windows to see if that would allow me to force it to be an SSH client? And I was thinking, do I need to be admin? Will there be dependencies? Will EDR flag these binaries that I bring over? Or how would I get on? So I just decided to give it a try. So here's my temp directory. And I've just renamed the one I brought over from OpenSSH to show it's different. It's ssh1.exe. And I tried to run it and I got that DLL error. And it's libcrypto, it turns out to be, was missing. I just went over back to the OpenSSH folder, looked at any chunky DLLs I thought might be missing, copied that over, and now when I move that into the temp directory, bingo, it seemed to be fully operational. I think at this point I was thinking, okay, it pulls up the help, but will it really work in my tunneling process? So I had to give it a go. So exactly the same process as previously. The only difference is now you can see I'm using ssh1.exe in the very top left, and I open up the reverse SOCKS proxy back in Kali, use proxy chains, and bingo, I'm getting back into my client network, which I thought was quite neat. It's worth saying that CrowdStrike also ignored the SSH binary and the DLL being brought over, which probably is expected really, considering that that's what Windows uses itself. So next up I thought, okay, let's try some common techniques. And if I mentioned earlier, I quite enjoy NTLM relaying. I was thinking, could this setup cope with something like that, slightly more sophisticated than just reading some shares? So I just wanted to show you that to prove how easy it is. So the first image, quite similar to what I was previously showing, but in this one, I'm setting up a local port forward, listing on quadruple 8, and I'm sending it back to 80 back on Cali. This be familiar if anyone's on any LDAP reeling, these numbers would look familiar to you. In the middle then, I'm back on Cali, and all I do is set up a listener on port 80 to test to see if someone hits quadruple 8 on Windows, will I get a hit on Cali just to see it kind of quite easily. So then I go to quadruple 8 in the bottom picture, that's Windows you're looking at, and all of a sudden you can see I'm reading from home David back on my cloud VM on Cali, and you can see the 200 in the middle image showing that the relay worked. So quadruple 80, 888 into 80 works fine. So in the whole NTLM relaying world, what you would do in reality is you would probably use petit potam to hit a web client to call back to you on quadruple 8. You would relay that to 80 on your internal Kali network where NTLM relay is listening. You would pass that then off to LDAP where signing might be disabled, and then you've complete control over the web client. If you've done this is old news. But yeah, that's how we would do it for NTLM relaying. So I just wanted to show you that in a kind of an easier fashion today. So another thing I thought would be quite useful is that command line access, because when you set up these tunneling tools, you're kind of just jumping through a box. And you lose your connection to the user. But when you have a C2, you keep that connection, which is really quite useful. I'm not saying this is a rival to C2, but it's just quite a similar approach. I was thinking of, could I get a command line access working? So what I did is, keeping in the spirit of using trusted binaries, although this is using PowerShell internally, so this is more of a living off the land rather than bringing it. So I use PowerShell from the internal side of things, and courtesy of ChatGPT, just started a PowerShell bind listener, and I think in this example I just started on localhost 8000. And what I did is I make sure to do localhost, because if it was on all interfaces, you would then get an annoying firewall pop-up saying, are you allowed to do this? You need to be admin, whatever. But normally on localhost, it won't complain about those things because nothing can get to it from externally. So then back on Kali, to try and connect to this little bind listener, just use proxy chains again, using netcat, localhost, and then hit your 8000, and now you've got your PowerShell callback, and you can see that you can use PowerShell from there. I tested this against MDE at the time, and it didn't complain. I tested it at my current job at a hedge fund. They had a bunch of MDs, or a bunch of EDRs, no issue with this. And as another red team on Discord said to me, a PowerShell listener on a local host is not considered malware, so you wouldn't expect it to be deleted. So yeah, I just found that was quite interesting. So it just gives you that little extra kind of thing coupled with your tunnel. And then another command line technique was given to me actually by Gavin Davies over at CCL, which when we was discussing this conference with him on Discord, he recommended trying out the SSH daemon, or the SSH server, and see if I can make that operational on a Windows box. So if you look again at my temp directory, I just have a few extra files. I've got the sshd.exe, I've got a host file, and I got a config file where I just tell it what port I want to start it on, which I think was 7001, and I got an authorized keys file. So I kick that off and then go back to Kali again, use proxy chains, but this time I can just SSH into the box. On port 7001, and now I've got the SSH access to allow me into the command line. So yeah, and the beauty of those files is you can bring a lot of them over as they are. You don't need to prepare them on the client device. I copy them over, even the host file. I did notice one issue, that if you copy it to ctemp or something, the host file complains about permissions, but if you copy it to downloads or pictures or whatever, it has a less of an issue about that, because maybe it's stored in a user area or something like that. So as it stands, I was thinking, God, this could be quite useful, and could I improve this? Could I come up with a technique that doesn't need proxy chains, doesn't need SSH, and then in comes Cloudflare's Warp, who says, hold my beer. Don't worry, this is my last AI generated image. This is what you get when you put in Cloudflare Warp, hold my beer, and tunnel. Yeah, I don't know why there's sheep there, but anyway. So it's probably best to explain with the next image, is a bit more techie. So think of the Cloudflare Warp as a VPN. So when you start your VPN on your machine, you don't need to be pointing it a certain way. You just run your tools, they go out through the VPN and they access the target network, which is great. So on the left here of this, your cloud environment is where your Kali is, and your Cloudflare Warp is running. So that's just running in the background, barely notices it's there. And then on your client device, you run your Cloudflared binary I mentioned previously, this time in tunnel mode. And then you just have complete access to the target network. As I say, the beauty of this, no port forwarding, no SSH required, or proxy chains or anything like that. So it's best to show you how simple this is on the command line as well. So the first image, I was debating even including it, is just showing that the VPN or the Cloudflare Warp is running on the Kali machine. And then in the middle of one is just your Cloudflare tunnel run command on the client device. And just for now, if you can notice it makes 4 connections in the red box. Near the end of the presentation, I'll come back to you and mention the significance of that. I think it's around redundancy, but just notice it makes 4 connections out to Cloudflare. Then back on Kali, you can notice no proxy chains, no nothing. I just run netexec and I'm back onto the client network. I can read all of the data on the shares. So yeah, no legal or roots or anything like that. It's just a single command. So then I was thinking, let's demo this to the JumpSec guys. And then I gave them kind of a talk at one of our tech team talks that we hold. And one of the JumpSec guys started getting these errors. Failed to dial to edge. Cloudflare's edge is just what they call the edge of your infrastructure. And you need to get to the edge to form a perfectly formed tunnel. And so then at this point, I started feeling like Simon Cowell at the bottom. I was thinking, what kind of witchcraft have this client device got on its client device trying to stop this technique working? I just couldn't figure out. So as you do, I started Googling using ChatGPT, and came across the following. To my horror, posts like alternative to Cloudflare if I can't open port 7844. How do I change from port 7844? And then the kind of the similar errors that I was getting around dial context. And I was thinking, what is this 7844 requirement? And then with more searching, I came across this post. This is like the well-known MVP, Cyber Jake. This is one of these guys who's on the forums and answers everything and may not even work for them. But so in plain English, he just says you can't use this Cloudflared binary in tunnel mode using 7844 without having 7844 available to you. And then he provides a link to a document which I duly accessed, and this is the document. So it became apparent to run this binary in tunnel mode, I needed to hit this v2.argotunnel.com domain on the left, and I needed to do it on 7844 on either TCP or UDP. Actually, the tunnel defaults to UDP, so you also need to tweak it to say use TCP instead. So given the Cloudflare binary running in access mode was using 443, and the exact same binary running in tunnel mode now requires 7844. Two things came to mind. Never assume things without testing your technique well. I just assumed that a binary in tunnel mode would exactly use 443 as well. And we all like using 443 because it's an easy exit out of environments. But yeah, it wasn't the case. And then secondly, always read the manual. Like, if I spent more time reading, I wouldn't have wasted so much time debugging it and figure out why is this going wrong. To be honest, the undocumented workaround and hidden feature I found to get around this issue is probably why I'm here today, to be honest. So it isn't all that bad. So now I have a big issue. It's broken one of my 5 tests, which I'll remind you of. So it's no longer firewall friendly, this further technique using Warp. So just to illustrate it graphically for you as well, it's quite easy. So we've got a client device on the left. It's trying to get the Cloudflared edge on the very right. And it's trying to do it on 7844. And your super duper strict firewall in the middle might only be allowing 443 because it only wants to get Windows updates on that port or whatever. It's super strict. So to avoid these edge cases, I wanted to come up with an idea to get around this. So I took a deep dive into Cloudflared's code, which is on GitHub, which is great because it is open source, so you can get in there. And to be honest, I was kind of panicking at this point, trying to get it work. I said, could I amend it? But I knew if I started amending it and recompiling it, I would immediately break the whole trusted part of it, and the SHA-256 would not be relevant anymore, and it would no longer be trusted. So after a couple of hours, I came across this edge command line switch, and in the description is address of the Cloudflare tunnel server only works in Cloudflare's internal testing environment. And then you can see hidden true. So that explains why when I run the help, this never appeared, so it wasn't an avenue I was looking for. So this is a bit of a light bulb moment. I was thinking, God, if I can use this edge feature, and if it does in fact work outside of the testing environment, could I point a tunnel somewhere internally, then grab the tunnel, take it out on a more convenient port like 443, and then remap it back to 7844 when it's outside to get to the place where it needs to be to form the fully functional tunnel. This is tricky to envisage in speech, I get it. So graphically, this is what I was thinking about. So here we've got two tunnels on the client device, or double tunnel, or whatever way you want to refer to it. So first we have got the Cloudflared access, which we know we've been using for SSH, we can use for RDP and stuff, and uses 443 outbound. We start that listening on, we say 9,000. And then we have the Cloudflare tunnel using this new edge feature, hopefully, pointing it at the Cloudflare access tunnel and then taking it out on 443. And then when it hits our CF redirect hostname that I would now set up, we could then reroute it back to where it needs to go. So now you've got your functioning tunnel in green here again. And in theory, I was hoping this would work. Just to show you what's happening on the hostname side, that bit on the right with the remapping, I'm showing you that as well. So here we have the hostname that I've set up, cfredirect.redteaming.org, and then I'm remapping that back to the TCP port of the argotunnel.com where it needs to reach Cloudflare's edge. The TCP is important here, as I mentioned earlier. You have to force it to be TCP purely because the Cloudflare access command only runs with TCP. It doesn't have a UDP version, so you have to force a tunnel to use TCP to make the connection. And if you're like me, this is probably an even better screenshot to see it in commands. So here we have the Cloudflare tunnel, now with our undocumented edge feature in play. You can see I'm pointing at localhost 9000. Protocol HTTP2 is just forcing the tunnel to use TCP, which we need, and then your token at the end. And then number one hits our Cloudflare access command using TCP, and you can see it's listening on 9000, and when on number two, it will then hit CF redirect.redteaming.org when it gets its data on 9000. And then back over in the hostname, we then make the mapping back to where it is intending to go. So essentially, like the last slide in green, this is the same thing again. The tunnel in red is how I was aiming to do it. So this was just a theory, to be honest. So it was just a case of fingers crossed. So here we are with the double tunnel. So on the top of the screen, we've got the access TCP, and we've got the listener on 9000 waiting for the tunnel to hit it. And then in the middle one, we've also got on the client device, we've got it operating in tunnel mode. And you can see I'm using this new undocumented edge feature to point a tunnel at our access tunnel on 9000. And you can see that one single connection is made because I'm just mapping to the one region, I think. So excitedly then I was thinking, okay, this seems to have made a connection. Back to Cali, netexec, and runs, and we're back in business, essentially. So now I felt that this is really useful, so it can be used in lots of circumstances. It's ignored by CrowdStrike, at least initially. The cyber jakes of the world don't know we've got a workaround to get around the 7844 with this double tunnel idea. So I thought it would be worth sharing publicly with you guys. A few further things maybe. At the very onset I said, remember the 4 connections? And you can see the last slide was just a single connection. When you go to your portal and try this on Cloudflare, it will come up as degraded. I think it's because you've gone from 4 to 1 connection. But in terms of performance and using this in your daily job, it was a non-issue for me, and it could still be used fine. And another thing, I guess, is this double tunnel may not always be required. One client device is just allowed outbound on 7844. So it's just a single command and you were into the client device. Quite simple. Also, obviously, the SSH version, there is no port requirement because it uses 443 from the get-go. So that was it. That was my little workaround. So just to recap what we've done and how we've achieved it. So First of all, we've used our native SSH and the Cloudflared access command. That was not strictly bring your own trusted binary, given what I was relying on SSH being installed. Next up, we imported SSH, which was quite a new technique for me. Used Cloudflared access, and we need proxy chains and SSH in that scenario. That's not a bar to entry, really. That could easily work as well. It can be used. And then we've got the warp plus Cloudflare tunnel, and with that, we need SSH, proxy chains, and we need the 7844 outbound. And then finally, we to get around the 7844 limitation, we've done the double tunnel with Cloudflared. So we needed the Cloudflared tunnel, warp, and the Cloudflared access. I should add that this means, at this point, it's by no means like a C2 replacement or anything. It's just another string to our bow, maybe more akin to kind of a legal O replacement. You could imagine a C2 like Havoc, for example, running this binary on a DC to kind of give them more access to another part of the network they can't get to. I see Havoc has got an extension for Legalo, for example, so you could do another one for Cloudflared, and you might even get more mileage out of this. I say Havoc because I think Spider's in the audience who developed Havoc, so yeah, that's a good example of a great C2. It may not have been named as bring your own trusted binary, but the ransomware guys have used these techniques previously, so you'd hear, if you read the DFIR reports, they bring AnyDesk, they bring TeamViewer, so this is just similar, but this is just tunnels, but it's a similar type of approach that all these fall under. Okay, so now on to probably one of the harder and final slides to prepare for is actually defending against this stuff. So as attackers, we focus less on prevention normally. So I need to spend some time exploring that with you now. Hopefully come up with some detections to help the blue team. So the first one is around process telemetry. If you've got command line switches like tunnel, access, token, things like this, you can alert upon them and you realize, okay, maybe the Cloudflared binary is being used on our network. So that's one thing you could try. The name, maybe for strength and depth, you could alert on the word Cloudflared, but you know what we'll do. We'll change it to chrome.exe, we'll change it to MS Edge, we'll Teams, whatever, to get around that. So the name might not be so good, but yeah, I would put it in there as well. Next up, DNS logging. So when you run these tunnels, I notice that there's a lot of DNS queries go out, particularly to argotunnel.com, which is the old name for Cloudflared. They just moved on to that new name, and it tries to do update checks and things like this. So, yeah, that would be a good thing to monitor, any call outs to argotunnel.com. Next up, firewall logging. As you know, with 7844 outbound, that is a recommendation I think I've seen to block that. That's no good now, but maybe the ransomware guys might be lazy or something, and then try that and you could flag on that. But yeah, so I think that may be another thing just to stop outbound UDP and TCP. Next up, file monitoring. So downloads from the Cloudflared binary on GitHub would be useful. They supply the SHA-256 hash, so even if we move it to our own repo to get around the Cloudflared one and try and download from that, you can check the hash and see that it's a Cloudflared binary and then block it when it comes into your network. So they would be the main aspects from a defensive point of view, to be honest. So finally, just to thank you. I'd just like to thank the organisers. I've never been to a cybersecurity conference before, so my first one actually to be speaking at is a bit strange. So yeah, thanks for being invited to such a legendary event, and it's been fun preparing for this and a chance to share this stuff with you guys. Hopefully this makes your tests a bit easier and the bar to entry becomes a bit lower, because I haven't seen this blocked yet, and who knows if maybe people will catch on to this after this talk and start doing it, but maybe not, given it is Cloudflare. My LinkedIn is there. If you have any questions 2-3 months from now, whatever, get in touch and hopefully I can help you out if you have any issues with running any of this stuff. And my blog is there. I'll try and put a post up with this over Christmas. I might work on it. I've been super busy on site for the past couple of weeks, so I haven't had a chance. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So we've got a bit of time for questions. If anyone's got any questions, raise your hand and we'll run around the mic. Okay.
With the domain remap, would it be, because an attacker would probably have recently registered the domain, unless they're thinking quite far in advance, would it be easy to pick that up because it's not going to a Cloudflare official domain, it's going to one that's registered through Cloudflare?
So you're saying the whole redteaming.org domain, that is a good one as well in terms of a new domain could be flagged upon, and they would have to build up a trusted domain over an amount of time. That is a good idea as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I think that just leaves me to say thanks very much to David. I think it was a fantastic first talk. Cheers. And if everyone could show their appreciation one more time. Thank you.